Wealth in Toronto doesn't always glitter. Sometimes it whispers. Behind manicured estates and towering skyscrapers lie families whose power was built not overnight, but over centuries. They began with farms, bakeries and radios, and turned them into empires that shaped the nation's culture, commerce and identity. From the Cawthras' silent landholdings to the Thompsons' global media throne, each dynasty carries both triumph and shadow. Fortunes made, lost and reborn. Their stories reveal more than money. They expose the architecture of legacy itself, how wealth survives time, and how names become immortal. But as Toronto's old money clings to its thrones, a quiet question rises beneath the skyline. Who truly holds the city's future, and who's already taking it back? In the number 10 position, we have the Corra family, a dynasty that began not with skyscrapers or stock markets, but with soil, silence, and strategy. Toronto was still a frontier when Joseph Cawthra arrived in the early 1800s, armed not with fortune, but with foresight. He saw what others didn't: land, vast stretches of it. And while others chased gold rushes and politics, he built his empire beneath the city's very foundations. Their story is one of quiet endurance. No scandals, no headlines, just generation after generation preserving power through patience. From the grand Cawthra estate to their invisible influence over early Toronto society, their name became synonymous with heritage, wealth that whispers, not shouts. But as the city rose around them, other families turned quiet inheritance into industrial might, and one such family would soon redefine what old money truly meant in Toronto's golden age. In the number 9 position, we have the Ashbridge family, a name woven into Toronto's earliest soil, older than the city itself. Their empire wasn't forged in factories or finance, but in the stubborn preservation of land, passed from hand to hand like sacred trust. When the Ashbridges settled along the shores of Lake Ontario in the 1790s, the wilderness was their wealth. Over 2 centuries later, their estate still stands, a rare fragment of Toronto, untouched by time. Their story is not about expansion, but endurance. Generations resisted pressure to sell, to modernize, to cash in. They chose legacy over luxury, principle over profit. In a city obsessed with progress, they became its living memory. Yet, as Toronto grew into a metropolis of fortunes, another name would rise, one that turned machinery, ambition, and faith into a dynasty of unstoppable influence. In the number 8 position, we have the Massey family, the dynasty that turned hard steel and harder faith into one of Canada's most enduring legacies. Their story began with Daniel Massey, a humble farmer whose fascination with machines reshaped the nation's agricultural heart. From the clang of iron in a small Ontario workshop rose Massey Harris, the giant that powered farms from coast to coast. But the Masseys were never just industrialists, they were visionaries, patrons of art, architecture and education. Their wealth built theatres, churches and schools, shaping Toronto's cultural soul as much as its economy. Yet behind their generosity was a silent struggle, the burden of living up to a name that had become a national symbol. And as the city's lights grew brighter, a new kind of wealth emerged, one born not from factories, but from the glittering aisles of luxury itself. In the number 7 position, we have the Eaton family, the merchants who transformed shopping into spectacle and built an empire of dreams. It began with Timothy Eaton, a humble Irish immigrant who opened a small dry goods store in Toronto in 1869. His promise was simple: fair prices, honest value. But behind that promise lay a revolution. The Eaton department store became a palace of luxury for the common citizen, its marble halls symbolizing both aspiration and empire. For decades, the Eaton name defined Canadian wealth and power, a dynasty of retail royalty whose influence reached from boardrooms to Christmas parades. But success has its shadows. As new competitors rose, the empire that once dazzled the nation began to fade. Still, their legacy endures in Toronto's skyline, in memory, and in the very heart of its downtown. Yet another family was already preparing to take wealth beyond commerce, into global dominion. In the number 6 position, we have the Weston family, a dynasty that built its empire not on land or industry, but on the daily bread of a nation. It began in 1882, when George Weston opened a small Toronto bakery. From those humble loaves rose a global powerhouse spanning supermarkets, fashion, and food manufacturing. What started with flour became fortune. Through quiet ambition and generational discipline, the Westons turned everyday essentials into extraordinary wealth. Their name now echoes through brands like Loblaws, Holt Renfrew, and Selfridges, symbols of refined power and enduring trust. Yet their story is more than business. It's about balance, between visibility and silence, between profit and philanthropy. For over a century, they've shaped how Canadians eat, shop, and live. But as their influence spread worldwide, another family would rise, one whose fortune wasn't baked or built, but constructed from the very skyline itself. In the number 5 position, we have the Reichmann family. Immigrants who turned faith, discipline, and daring into one of the greatest real estate fortunes the world has ever seen. Fleeing wartime Europe, the Reichmanns arrived in Toronto with little more than conviction. From those uncertain beginnings, they built Olympia and York, the empire behind some of the world's most iconic skylines, including New York's World Financial Center and Toronto's first Canadian Place. Their rise was breathtaking, their fall just as dramatic. When global markets crashed in the early 1990s, the family's billion-dollar holdings nearly vanished overnight. Yet, even in loss, their influence endured, their development still shaping cities, their philanthropy still touching lives. The Reichmanns proved that wealth could be rebuilt, but reputation must be earned. And as their towers reached for the clouds, another Toronto dynasty began broadcasting its empire across invisible waves. In the number 4 position, we have the Rogers family, visionaries who transformed static airwaves into a multi-billion-dollar communications empire. It all began with Edward S. Rogers, a young inventor obsessed with clarity, not of words, but of sound. His creation of the batteryless radio changed everything, and his son, Ted Rogers, would carry that spark into the television age. From a modest Toronto station, the Rogers name expanded into homes across Canada through radios, cable lines, and the glow of television screens. Their empire became a cornerstone of Canadian media, connecting millions while quietly weaving power through politics, sports, and culture. Yet behind every broadcast lay an old money philosophy: family control, legacy preservation, and relentless innovation. The Rogers dynasty proved that information itself could be inherited wealth. But as their signals conquered the nation, another family was perfecting the art of global luxury and control. In the number 3 position, we have the Bronfman family, a dynasty born from ambition, controversy, and unshakable vision. Their story began in the early 1900s, when Samuel Bronfman, the son of immigrant farmers, turned a small liquor business into Seagram, one of the world's most powerful distilleries. While prohibition crippled others, the Bronfmans saw opportunity, building a fortune that flowed across borders and generations. From the shadows of secrecy to the boardrooms of global finance, they evolved from whiskey barons to cultural patrons. Their wealth funded museums, universities, and the arts, embedding their name deep within Canada's social fabric. Yet their legacy has always balanced between admiration and mystery, between respect and resentment. The Bronfmans proved that vision could outlast scandal and influence could transcend industry. But as their empire matured, another Toronto family prepared to shape not just Canada, but the modern world itself. In the number 2 position, we have the Thompson family, guardians of a media empire that quietly shaped how Canada and much of the world sees itself. Their journey began with Roy Thompson, a man who started with a single radio station and an unshakable belief that information was the future's true currency. From that seed grew a global network, newspapers, television, and later the digital titan Thomson Reuters. Their wealth became generational, their influence almost invisible, yet everywhere, in headlines, stock markets, and boardrooms. The Thompsons mastered the art of presence through absence, ruling not by noise, but by control. They built their dynasty in whispers, their power flowing through data and decision. And while most fortunes fade with time, theirs only deepened. But even they would look upward, toward the family whose legacy defines Toronto's golden age of wealth, tradition, and silent authority. In the number one position, we have the Thompson family, the undisputed rulers of Canadian wealth and the embodiment of quiet power. Their story is one of evolution, not revolution. What began as Roy Thomson's humble radio venture in northern Ontario became a global media and financial empire worth tens of billions. Today, under David Thomson's leadership, the dynasty controls Thomson Reuters, investment firms, and vast art and real estate holdings that stretch across continents. Yet what makes them truly formidable isn't just their fortune, it's their restraint. The Thomsons have mastered invisibility in an age of exposure, their influence felt but rarely seen. They shape economies, steer media, and preserve an image of dignified silence. In a city of flashing wealth and fleeting fame, they remain the constant, proof that real power doesn't boast, it endures. But beyond Toronto's old money lies a question: who's rising next?